Thank you very much, all of you. It's lovely to see so many familiar names in the group of participants. So this is our Gridly webinar on Spreadsheets and Gridly, your winning content localization formula. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to start off with Václav taking us through the merits and also potential pitfalls, and then we'll take a look at how this connection actually works at play between Google Sheets and Gridly. And so this is the two of us here. So it's myself. Hello, everyone. Some of you may know me already. And so, yeah, my background before Localized Direct and Gridly was game development. So kind of very familiar with that whole kind of side of the process. And I know there's a few people on this list that know me from all the way back then. So that's me. And then we have Václav as well. And Václav is our champ when it comes to understanding the processes here and how to produce global content, bringing those products to market. And so he'll be able to run us through that to start off with. So then we'll take a look at the live demo after that. Over to you, Václav.
Okay, thank you, Mike, and welcome everyone. I'm glad that so many people are interested in spreadsheets and content localization. So let's jump right in. So if you search through the web, there are lots of articles why spreadsheets are actually bad for content localization. Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I was just talking about that if you search through the web there, you can find actually lots of articles about why spreadsheets are bad for content localization. And we also wrote about it a couple of years ago. And but nearly in every conversation, companies mention to us they use spreadsheets in localization, and especially Google Sheets. And these are not some unknown startups, but worldwide known companies. So what's going on here? Why Google Sheets are so popular? Let's take a look at some of the key reasons why Google Sheets are actually great. And the first one is onboarding, or should I say no onboarding needed. Because when you know Excel, you know Google Sheets. The UI is so simple that no training is needed to get started. And if you want to do some more complex stuff, then you can find tons of articles and content to learn about it. So it's easy to jump in and start quickly. Reason number one. Reason number two is that given the fact that it's a web-based SaaS product and everything happens in a browser, there is no saving or loading, they just work in real time. And the performance is simply awesome, excellent. Even for bulk updates, others can see them in real time. And Google did fantastic work, fantastic job here. No wonder, right? It's a technology giant. And speaking of Google, that's actually the reason number three that I want to bring up. Because by choosing Google Sheets, you are not choosing just this product alone, but you embrace the whole suite, Google Workspace. That means you can use Google Account for user management, you can use Google Drive for storing spreadsheets, and there are tons of other tools and functions available like Google Translate, Sheets API, and so on. But the greatest advantage, as I see it, is the spreadsheet itself. Originally starting as a paper worksheet for accounting, then being used as a business tool, spreadsheets transformed a lot of industries, and now people are starting to use them for localization, which makes a lot of sense. And we hear tons of feedback about that from our customers. Why is that so? Because with spreadsheets, you can see and update multiple languages and content at once. And that's great because you can't do that with regular localization tools. Usually with regular localization tools, you work on a language pair basis versus with spreadsheets, you work on a language grid basis. It's like 2D versus 3D. And by working with multiple languages, you can identify cross-language issues. For example, testers can cross-check between languages, and if they spot an issue, they can quickly verify how many languages are affected, and so on. Simply put, projects get a lot easier with spreadsheets. Okay, so why all that fuss? And of course, you want to know the winning content localization formula, right? So to be able to give you that, we need to take a look at the content localization process. When you localize something, there's always the content management part needed. Simply, you need to work with content to be able to localize it. So content localization ties together two distinct areas, content management and localization. And here you can see a simplified process. It usually starts with creating content, then developers are adding keys to that, then you want to test that content in a game or app. There is some point where you decide to translate the content. Of course, then you need to manage the statuses, what's ready for translation, what's ready for production. You want to check the quality of localization, and at some point you want to publish it. And once it's published, then of course you want to update it and change it or add new content, and then it starts again. And although this is here, it is plotted as a linear process, it's usually not linear, and you jump back and forth between each step, and each step can represent a specific process in itself. And yeah, things get even more complicated when you want to manage not just text, but also images, audio, when the number of languages is high, or when you want to use a pivot language, or when there are additional steps in your workflow needed, such as prototyping or language copywriting, or you need to run through legal checks, or you have some security requirements that you cannot share certain content with certain people, and so on. So given this complexity, what pains people using Google Sheets for content localization encounter? And here you can see some frequently reported to us by companies we talk to. And yeah, so let's take a look at them. So with Google Sheets, you either keep one master file, or at some point you need to make various versions to be able to collaborate. And there is no mechanism to manage these versions, and there can be loads of them. Also, even though you can lock columns and share your spreadsheets with certain users, you can manage easily what people can see and what they can do in the spreadsheet. So sometimes you share more than what you want, and there are some security risks. Also about flexibility. It's good feature of Google Sheets, but it's also a drawback, because with such a flexibility, it's really hard to maintain a structure, to keep format needed for content to be published to the game or to the app. That's quite difficult with Google Sheets, and things can be easily messed up. What's also missing is status tracking. We hear that all over again, that content is updated once it's sent for translation, and that people can track what has been changed in the meantime. Another pain point we hear over and over again is that they miss localization support, that there is no support for tokens to work with variables or indicate that something shouldn't be translated. And it's really hard to exchange data with Google Sheets. The consequences of that: manual steps needed, lots of copy pasting, moving content back to master file or the file that you want to sync with your game, unwanted changes, duplicated IDs, not to mention the worst of all, like broken builds. And we already mentioned outdated content or translation. And with no translation memory or things like that, you might end up retranslating the same content. So the result, this all has a negative impact on the speed of the whole process. And with the need of manually checking of everything, the content quality is at risk. And what we love to do then becomes stressful. And I'm going to quote here one of our customers that said, who said, "We manage everything in Google Sheets and it's a mess." So at the end of the day, to handle all this, there is time, resources needed, and that means cost, right? So even though Google Sheets are free, there is a price. So now we can see that there is something missing for content localization in Google Sheets. And you might be asking, how can Gridly help with that? So let's dive into it. First and foremost, in Gridly, the content is structured. There are records that are identified with IDs that are handled by the system. They can't be duplicated, they can't be blank. And also within a column, all data is of a particular type. That means that columns are mapped to data types, and that means that developers can count on that. So for example, if they need something to be a number, then they can rely that with Gridly it's going to be always number because it's that data type. Also, you can attach various metadata describing the content structure, such as column ID, column name, column description, view ID, or metadata describing the grids in Gridly. So that's a huge benefit. Another big one is version control. That means that you can create branch and share to other teams where they can work safely, and then you can merge it back to the master branch. And Gridly keeps track of what has been changed and then displays that to you, and you can easily act on that. This is particularly useful for example, A/B testing, or when you have staged rollouts, when you have an environment for development, staging, production, and you need to move content through those environments. So version control. Another great thing is that Gridly helps with tracking statuses. And this is done with dependencies. This is a unique feature that you can't find anywhere else. And what dependencies do, they bind statuses of your content assets to changes in your content. That means that, for example, if you do some change in your source language, then all of a sudden, all existing translation in target languages are marked as out of date automatically. This is particularly useful for projects with pivot languages, where you translate from less common language, such as Swedish, to, let's say, English, and then to global. And you can use this not just for languages. You can create custom statuses between audio and images and so on. Gonna move on to access control, because with Google Sheets, it's more or less all or nothing, and you can't manage properly some activities. In Gridly, there is a granular level of access control. You can create views that represent chunks of your content, where you can define what columns and records are displayed. You can limit access to those views. You can filter out what you want to share there or what you want to export. And what's great about it is that actually everybody is looking at the same data, because changes are reflected in all views. Also, you have user groups and you have permissions. And this combination with views, user groups, and permissions, you can reach that granular level of access control in Gridly. And of course, in Gridly, you can find full-blown localization support. You can define languages, you can use localization tools such as translation memory, glossaries. If translators want to work with language pairs, they can with extended view. There is support for tokens or tags, so you can work with variables. And there is full-blown localization, QA support. You can log issues, use LQA models, and so on. And finally, huge benefit is Gridly's connectivity and extensibility. That's where Gridly really shines, because almost any action with content can be done also programmatically with API. There is API key management, and the content structure is described by the metadata that we talked about, and that makes it much more developer-friendly to use the API. You also have support for various files, such as JSON or PO files. And with Gridly, you also get out-of-the-box integrations with common CAD tools, game engines. And developers can leverage SDKs to easily fetch content from Gridly in their code. And you can even run your own code within Gridly without any infrastructure needed. And there's more like automations and so on. But this could be a whole separate session about this, and we don't have time for that. So I'm going to wrap up quickly. So what's the winning content localization formula? So we have seen that people use Google Sheets, and why they are usually the first choice for game or app content localization. And there is nothing wrong with it. You can start quickly and you can leverage its benefits, but at some point, drawbacks will emerge. And at that point, you should start to manage your content. And then it's good to connect Google Sheets with Gridly to gain additional capabilities, such as version control, status tracking, to provide structure for your content, to gain something that we call a single source of truth that you can rely on when you publish your content. And we have heard from our customers that with Gridly, they can roll out content update faster, they're more confident about content quality, and they actually gain control over the whole process. Okay, so that was the theory. Now over to you, Mike, to see live demonstration.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed, Vaslav. Okie dokie. Right. So here we have our nice Google Drive here, and we've got these two sheets here. Now I'm going to show you two different ways that this can work. The initial one is called the Gridly connector, and so this basically just allows the pulling of data from a Google Sheet into Gridly, and it's very, very simple to set up. And so I wanted to introduce that one first. Then there's an actual push and pull integration that we have available on our GitHub, which we will share the URL for. So then that will then allow you, but then that allows that requires some actual kind of coding expertise and some scripting to allow that push and pull to actually happen. So that's slightly more complicated. So just as a simple out the box demonstration, the connector will be the one that we start with. So we'll open up this Google Sheet here. So we'll see the usual kind of stuff. I mean, you may or may not have a path here, but certainly you would have your string ID, your source text, any additional info, max length, perhaps. And then at this particular point, we've already done some translations. So we have some translations in here, and we're just looking to now kind of look at how can we get all of this into Gridly. So we've got our Google Sheet all set up. If we go into Gridly, as some of you who have already seen Gridly, you'll see you've got your company set up, and then you have these databases. And within the databases, we have any number of grids. And so in this particular one here, we have our Google Sheet integration. And then we have this one here called Connector, which is what I'll use today. Now, when accessing the integrations, you can click up here and you'll see Gridly Connector over here, and it will allow you to connect to a number of different sources. So what we'll do is you can create a new connection here, and then we'll allow you to create a new source, or you can click on source here, and then you can then kind of adapt a current source, or indeed create a new one at this point here. So I've got this one here called Mike source. So if I select it, we can see here that I've created two connections here already. But when you're initially setting this up, basically you just provide a source name, whatever that might be, and then all you do is within the share, within the sheet itself. Get this. So within the share here, you would then just add that address here at this point here, and then you click on done. It's just as simple as that. Then once that's been added here, you then input your sheet ID, and the sheet ID would simply be this ID at the top up here. So once you have that connected, you just save and check that connection, and then off we go. So now that source, the actual kind of where you're actually kind of grabbing from, has now been set up. So if I now come back out there, and then if I look at my connections, I've set up these two connections here. This connection, if I select it here, we can see that we can have a look at the settings here. So the settings are you give it a particular name for that connection. The type. Oh, so this is win source. This one connection, wrong person. It's me here. Right. So if I look at the setting here, so we've got mic source, we've got connector, and then basically the destination here. So you've got your grid set up. So if I then come out of here and then go into the grid, you'll be able to see how those kind of mirror. And then we connect to a particular database, and then that connector grid that I mentioned before. Then we have the different columns. Make sure the columns are aligned as you desire. And then once you're happy, then you save and check connection, and all is good. So I'm just going to cancel out that. So if I go into the grid itself, if I go down here, and then go to the grid connector here. Right, so what we can see here is that if I go to my default view, We can see this is a nice empty one, so I wanted to show there's no smoke and mirrors. It's all kind of as you see it. So there's no path created yet, so which will obviously be pulled from this particular column here. And so you'll see that this will then populate with the information I need. Now, one of the important things, and this is what Vasilav was saying before, of tracking those statuses, making sure things don't fall through the cracks, is dependencies. So if I select here, we can see here that this grid, this empty grid has been set up so that we've got dependency of French, Italian, German, and Spanish based on the English here. So if there are any changes to the source text, it will then mirror and it will set the targets as out of date, etc. And of course, like Vasilav said, you can associate various types of column with dependencies as well. So you can certainly set screenshots, etc., as being out of date if the language featured in that screenshot also changes. So again, so it's making sure that things get tracked all the way through the process. So we have different column types. So if I select this one here called additional information, we can then see we've got column properties here. And then here you've got all of these ones that Vasilav mentioned before. So if they're, if it's number, like you mentioned, only numbers can be input into that column, for example. And of course, you can have files, so you can have screenshots and WAVs and whatever, MP4s, whatever it might be, MP3s. Okay, so if I just cancel that, and I will run this sync now. So we've got a sync connection here. So this little sync icon, MyGS connection, and I will sync that now. So we'll see here, this will take a few seconds to update. And then once it does, it always seems to take longer when you're actually showing people. Okay, so here we go. So we've got, so if I just change my view here, so I've changed to my demo view, we can see here that we've got our path as per the original Google Sheet. And then the path itself has been structured in that way as well. So we'll actually create that path structure. So if we then had string section 1 / mission 2, whatever it might be, then that will all be generated in that way and then create these subpaths as a result as well. Okay, so the way that I've currently set this one up is that I've actually, every new string that's pulled into Gridly using this connector will then have work in progress. So this is a particular type of column that you could potentially use. So this one here is a single selection. So you can then use this to then, bulk change, or on a per record basis, change for a different status to then highlight at what point of the process this particular string is in. So if we then scroll across, we can see this is all work in progress at the moment. If I scroll across, we can see that French, Italian, German, etc. If we carry on a bit further, if I just minimize this down, we can see here that French, Italian, German, we've got up to date, C over here in Italian is up to date as well. This is another type of data type here, which is a formula based one. And this formula is actually checking against not this one, but this one here is now checking against the length of the French in accordance with the character limit here. So it will then return a value. So if I actually select this, we can see here, if the character limit, basically going all the way down this, if the character limit has been exceeded, it will return a result with color, which will be check. And then if it's fine, then it will return it okay. So if I select this and then say that the character limit is 2, we'll see that probably Italian will still be fine. But I'll change that again to 2. And we'll see that actually, no, it's flagged these because there must be a trailing space here. Okay, so we've got 2 is the limitation here. So we can see that those are kind of flagged as being out of the limitation allowed. So change this to 5, and then we'll change back to OK and color code in the right way as well. Now, one of the things that Vasilav mentioned as well was the whole kind of view side of things. So again, so you might then have a formula that's checking for these things. So you could then have a particular view set up, which will then check for just those strings that have an overlong issue with them. So again, you can very quickly move between those views. Now, there's the ease at which you can perform these tasks by changing from view to view, depending on what you want to see. But also, like Vasilav mentioned, it's a case of being able to share content with people where you only want them to be able to interact with certain things. So if I select up here, so this particular, so for example, the translator view here, if I select that and then look at the available columns here, you can then choose at this point who can view and who can edit. So for example, the source text, the English, is not editable, but it is viewable. And of course, that can apply to all those other columns that you have as well. But it just simply means in the way that Google Sheet can't control that, you can say, right, I'm going to share this translated view with this particular group of people, and so they will then interact with those strings in the right way, and not, you know, the potential for copy paste errors that then move from one column to another, etc., can obviously be a bit of an issue with a spreadsheet like Google Sheet. Right, so if I go back to my demo view here. Okay, so we've got our strings here. We can then choose to then change, you know, some of these if we want to, if we have the ability to do so. I think status is not currently editable, but it will be now. So I can then choose to say that, okay, so this one's work in progress. This is now ready for translation. And then you can choose to drag and drop, or you can choose to double click on the little square at the bottom, and then it will fill everything from that view down. So everything is very much view based. Any interaction you have with the view will then affect everything within that view. So, you know, do be aware of that. But let's go back to our Google Sheet. So if we go back to our Google Sheet, we'll just take one of these strings here. So actually what you'll see is, if I scroll down to the bottom, there were actually some strings that were added at the bottom down here. So we've got this from how to play, and then we've got choose a game mode. We've got a few of these here, and then we've got another one here called audio, and then we've got some audio here. So if I come back over here and I scroll down to the bottom here, or you can press Control and down arrow, which will take us down to the bottom here. You'll see that some of these have actually been entered using the translation memory. See, there's a little TM icon that appears in the corner here. So again, if you have that translation memory assigned to a particular project, then obviously it will automatically populate those if that's what you indeed want to do. You can disable it if you want to, of course, it's totally your choice. But then you'll see that there's other things that happen as well. So for example, we have a tag setting system here as well. So this will then check, so you can actually choose to create your own custom tags as well that it will check against. So again, these are all things to just kind of make sure that what you're getting back is the best quality as well. So for example, the translation here doesn't have this this particular variable here, so it needs to have that. So it will then return this missing tag from source, for example. But I digress. So let's go back to here again. So if I then choose one up here and just say error bad, and I've changed that in the English. So that's changed in the English. And so, you know, the whole point of this is to kind of say, okay, so if you have teams that really enjoy the Google Sheet experience, and, you know, it's going to be, you know, impossible to move these guys away, absolutely brilliant. Leverage all of that good stuff, absolutely no worries at all. But then when it comes to the managing of that kind of that localization pass, that LQA pass, etc., then doing that through Gridly is obviously a massive benefit. So we've now got error bad down here. It's str error. Let me just copy now. Right, so if I come over here and then run my sync again, we'll see that will then change. So what it will do is the way that these connections have been set up is that I have one. So what would normally happen is you would just pull all of that initial data with any translations that you may well have, and you pull that all into Gridly. But what I want to do now is I just want to focus on pulling other information. So the English, the string ID, the path, but I don't want to pull the languages anymore, because the languages are now, you know, up to date from what's currently in the Google Sheet. So basically, I just want to pull the English only. So I've created a separate connector just to do this. So I'll choose the English only. So if I now sync that, we'll now see that, so once that refreshes, then we can go and find that particular string. So if we select, if it's the ID, if it's over here on the left, is my ID gone? Maybe I have not ID enabled on this one. If I change back to my, oh, silly boy. If I change back to my demo default view, then I should have ID here, I think. Again, I've also moved it from here. That's so weird. Okay, so if I find that particular ID, again, we can filter over here. So if I look for str error, so we see we've got that string here now. So if I scroll back across, we'll see that now, because that says error bad, because that's been pulled from the Google Sheet. If I scroll across, we can then see that these are now set as being out of date. So that's all good, and as one would expect. If I then go back to here again, and if I add some more data, so if I say this is additional, and then I add some max text length here. So if I say the text length for this particular one here is 10, even though it's obviously far longer, this is just to give you an example of something that exceeds the potential translation. Oh, actually, if I add that 10 down here as well, so if I add a new string here, And if I call this one 5, so again, this could be, what then happens at your end as well. Okay, so we're adding that here, and then we'll say that this has got a maximum of 5, and then new string here, for example. String here. Okay, so now we've got a new string here. We can create more changes, etc., as you so wish. So if I go back to here again, and then I get rid of my filter. I get rid of my filter over here. So on this STRL, I don't want that one anymore. And then I then do my sync connection. Again, I've got my mic GS connection, but I want my English only. Again, after the first pass, you'd probably remove that that initial one just to save on any confusion. So then if I sync that now, and then move back across, then we can see this populate. So if we then scroll across again, so by using the path directory, we can also see if there's new strings down here. So we've got our section 4 audio here. So again, that would then filter using the path itself. So we've got really bad, we've got work in progress, we've got additional information, which is it's a new string. We've got a character limitation of 5. So that's all good at the moment. If I then add some text here, we'll see that change. So at this point here, we're going to send whatever we've got out for translation. So if I get rid of my sync connection, you can now choose to send that out via an export like this. So we've got a localization export, and then you can then send that out, and that'll be a file that can then be translated by the LSP, or you can choose to push to memsource and memoq here with these two plugins, or of course you can choose to work directly within Gridly. So if I add some text here, okay, so we'll add that there, but you'll see because that's well over the 5 characters, it's flagged these as being text that needs to be checked. So again, so if I add, again, you can just add them directly in here as well. So if I then do it, if I copy that there as well, then we've got 2 that require that. Now this global length check here is, again, like I mentioned, a formula-based data type. So this is now checking across all the languages. So if any of these length checks feature the word check, it will flag this as needing to be checked. And as I said before, if I then go in here and then I've got a view that says global length check view, this will then filter purely based on this particular column. So we'll see here, we've got this. So global length check contains check. Then I want this to be shown within this view. So once it's in this view, then we can then look at these translations and look about how we can go around fixing them. So yeah, so then that's a very kind of simplistic way of being able to use these views to very much see exactly what you're after. So if I go back to my default view here. So yeah, so we have that. We also have, you can then see what requires translation. So if you did have, so for example, you would potentially have a ready for translation view, for example. So this would then filter all the strings. So if options, arcade, time trial, etc. are still work in progress, you can choose to create a view again that will filter on just the strings that you want that are set as ready for translation. And then those will be the ones that then go out for form part of the export, or the ones that are worked on. Again, if you change the translator view to only show those strings that have this status, then obviously they will only see those strings. So yeah, so you can then have that working like that, but we also got this translation overview here. So again, it gives you that very kind of quick, okay, based on this particular view, we can then see how many records are not completed. You can also see here which ones are retranslate and which ones are brand new. And then it's worked out in a word count as well. So it's 23 in for this particular one here, because obviously I added the text for the French on 2 of them. So yes, and that's what this is 8 and this is 6. So yeah, so you've got this view as well. So that's also very important to be able to review as well. So yes, so you've now sent the text out for translation. You may want to create a branch, for example. Again, one of the things that Vaslav mentioned. So at this point here, you can then say, I want to create a new branch. So that will then create a totally separate kind of instance, a duplicate of those strings in that status. So you can then work on those in isolation. And then once those are worked on and you want to then merge them back in, it will then track that merge. And then you can choose how you want that merge to take place. I shan't show you that now because time is against us. So yeah, so we've talked about views. The text has gone out for translation, and then some of the translators or other people within the team are finding issues that they want to comment on. So what we can then do here is, if there's a specific French issue, then you can right click on here and then add a ticket. But if there's a specific English-based one, a source-based one, which would be useful for others to know about. We can add a ticket here. Now you can add basic and LQA issues to these particular records. So if you just include a basic one, it might be, verb or noun, or whatever that question might be, who's saying this particular thing, and then a description. And then you can add that. So once that's added, it will then create this little icon here, and it will also say it's added to the ticket center here. So if you view that ticket, that ticket can now be assigned to somebody that has a user within Gridly as well. So you can actually choose to send that to someone. And of course, you can also, if you want, you can then actually tag someone within this particular ticket as well, and that will then send them an email. So that's another thing that can be done. Notifications will appear at the top up here. So you've got notifications that appear, but also you can also refer to the ticket center at any point, and you can choose to filter. You can choose to search. You can choose to filter over here, and then you've got your open, resolved, and all over here as well. So that's the way. So the translations will go backwards and forwards. The questions will go backwards and forwards. If I actually select this one, I can then say, go away. So then that appears there. So now you've got that conversation going on as well. And of course, this is viewable by the other users on here, the other translators. So again, then obviously streamlining that whole kind of process, so questions aren't asked twice on the same record. So yes, that's an important thing as well. So one of the things I want to point out, so we've had our tickets, and we've talked about formulas as well. So once the text goes backwards and forwards, you can then again leverage the whole view system that we mentioned before. So with views, we've got, so for example, a ready for integration view. So there may be a process where you've got the stuff gone ready for translation, it's come back, and you've now said, right, now it's ready for LQA, and these particular strings are now ready for LQA, and that's all great. And then you've then chosen actually, so at the moment, so they're ready for LQA. So I have a view which is filtered on ready for integration, and you'll see there's nothing in this view at all. Let me get rid of that. So there's nothing in this view because it's filtering on just where the status contains ready for integration. Now again, so this, you may not want to go all the way down this road, but it's just if you are looking to kind of marshal your records in a good way, then it would make sense to have these statuses just to allow you to kind of very quickly kind of have a sanity check on what's going on. So if I come back to my demo view and change those strings so that actually they then change for ready for integration, and then I drag it down to these four here. Oh. Ready for integration. Okay, I'm not sure what I did there. All right, so if I select those ready for integrations down here, now if I go back to that view, because these strings have now been flagged as ready for integration, they now appear in this view. So if I then choose to then export these particular records, then we can do it this way. So here we have our CSV. We've got the different. You can then choose which columns you want to export, and then you can also choose how you'd like that separated file to be generated. So you can set that there as well, and then Excel file, of course, and then a TSV. So yeah, that's how you would then extract it back out. But there's obviously loads of ways of extracting the data back out. You may well want to use the API itself to actually pull back into the build process. So there's that side of things as well. Right. So coming out of here, I'm going to go back to my. I'm going to go over here to my push and pull over here. So this is a different Google Sheet. Time. So again, similar kind of setup. There aren't any paths in this one, but what it's going to do is this is then the solution that requires some of that scripting know-how. So what it will then do is it will actually pull the strings into Gridly, but it will then base the path based on the sheet name itself. So this one, tab 1 and tab 2, we've got our additional info, etc., in our languages. If I then come out of here and go into my push and pull grid, which has all been set up and is all good to go. So yeah, so I ran this earlier. We can see it's generated a tab 1, tab 2. If I go back to my default view here. So yes, we've got this all set up. Again, you can select it and then it will filter out into those. Now, what happens here is that this particular integration is pushed and pulled through these triggers here. So this is when you actually pull the sheet. So if I select this, we can then see what this trigger is actually doing. So when I'm clicking that execute button, it's triggering this action and it's invoking a Lambda function. And the Lambda function is Google Sheets pull. So if I click on edit here, we can then see how this is set up, and a zip file has then been uploaded to this instance, which will then run this particular scripting. So if I cancel out there, so what will happen is it will run this sheet pull, and we'll see that this we've got our payload here, and it's watching all the columns. So if I go back to, if I get rid of my connector here, go to push and pull. So if I then choose options here, this is sweet. And if I change that, and then if I add some more data here, like more data here, for example. Right, okay, so we're kind of changing this one. This is the option string here. So if I then go back in here, if I now pull this sheet here, if I execute, then we'll see that this will then run. It will run here, and we'll say the trigger executed successfully, and it will run that import at this stage here. So if I go back to my Google Sheet here, so option, this is suite, and this is on options. Okay, so that's importing here. There we go. So that's now updated the English, and then more data here, and it updates each of the columns that you've assigned and allowed for the update to take place. Now, what will then happen is, if we've already got translations in here, which we do, I think, it will flag these as being out of date, of course. So this is up to date. Oh, up to date, and that's all good. And then this one too. Okay, so it's now updated these two here. So now we have our push. So once you're happy with those, and maybe you've got a Boolean in here that somebody needs to check to make sure that that is actually approved and ready to go back in. Of course, that can form part of a view that you've created. We'll then push this back in. So if I then click, so this one works in a similar way to the pull, but it's invoking the Lambda function again, but it's using a different script here where it's doing the push instead. So if I then execute that, so this is now options up to date, and this one too. And then what we'll do is then that will then push that through, and that might take a few seconds for it to come through. And then this will then appear at this location here. I think it should automatically update in a second. So yeah, so that basically, so that allows you. So if it's a case of there might be parts within that Google Sheet that are very much required to then pull back from the Google Sheet back into the build process, then of course, then there is this method of being able to pull into Gridly, work in Gridly, and then push back up again. Now, maybe I need to just give this a refresh because for some reason it's not seem to update yet, and it's still not updating, which is wonderful news when you're doing a demo like this. Okay, so let me just go back and see if I've actually entered something incorrect here. Options up to date. Let me just add one here. New. Okay. Let's see if this does anything here. I'm going to just add new here, and I'm going to push it again. So let's do that here. Okay. So like it always works, anyone that's familiar with doing demos is you can practice something and it works 10 minutes before you actually show it. And then when you show it, it decides to go, well, you know what? Maybe not. So let's go back here. So make sure I'm actually in the right Google Sheet. Okay. Okay, and let's just refresh that. Let's see if that makes any difference. Yep, that's not working. So I'm going to have a word with somebody internally here and see if we can beat someone up. But yeah, that was working before. Anyway, so the whole process being that it should upload back to the Google Sheet from whence it came, or indeed to somewhere else. Again, like I say, it could be a case of you don't want to push it back into the same Google Sheet. You just want it to simply kind of go somewhere else, in which case you can then create a file, a specific file with just the data you need, because you may not want to have max text length, etc., being pushed back into the Google Sheet. You might just simply want the data itself. Right. Okay. That's me. Over. I'm going to, if you want to jump back in, Basla, and then we'll just take some questions, I think, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mike, for the demo. It was really interesting. And in the meantime, a couple of questions emerged. So let's go through them. And we have first one from Michelle. Thank you, Michelle. that reads, do you have an example of a Google Sheets with several tabs? How would Gridly sync it? So I think we covered that, haven't we?
Yeah, I think when it comes to, so if that's specifically using the connector, then you would just set up different connectors with different tabs. So you would have a number of tabs that would then be using that connector functionality to then feed into a particular grid, or and a number of them could feed into the same grid. So yes, it would just work like that. So yes, totally easy to do. If you're talking about the integration side of it, where it's the push and pull, then that basically generates the path based on the tabs themselves. So the tabs themselves would come out, and then when you push them back in, they would go into the correct tab as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's because you can set up multiple connections with multiple files to multiple grids and so on, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, so another question from Blaga. Thank you for that. What happens if someone syncs by mistake all columns from a Google Sheet instead of simply the source column? Is it easy to revert back?
1 second. Look, sorry, I'm just showing my screen quickly because look, it's appeared. What the hell? It's like, come on now. I'm going to blame it on Zoom. Yeah, it was latency created from using Zoom or something. Yeah, sure. I can see Norbert's in there probably debugging at the moment. Sorry, yes. So can you repeat the question again? Oh, and share the screen.
Okay, so the question was about that if someone syncs by mistake all columns from a Google Sheet instead of simply the source column, is it easy to revert back?
Yes, I think, but we do have a you can create backups through Gridly as well. I think that the like a revert function, I'm not sure if it would apply to an actual sync that then takes place. So that's something that I would have to actually look into and come back to you on. But certainly, I think that before doing a sync, it makes a lot of sense to run a backup, make sure that you've got something in place. So we take a daily backup anyway, but you can take backups of databases whenever you want, just to kind of feel safe in any action and somebody kind of running it when they shouldn't have run it properly.
Okay, maybe I would add to that also like the possibility to sync something by mistake is minimized by that not everyone can set up the connection and that the columns are mapped within that connection. So yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think it's going to be very difficult to kind of put the wrong data in the wrong column. Because it's already kind of like hardwired, as it were. It's only if somebody went into the actual setup and changed the setup, so specifically kind of targeted wanting to do that, then yeah, sure. Then of course there's the potential for that. But I think you have to kind of go some way to actually kind of want to kind of to get it wrong, to make a mistake.
Okay, great. Then can you send content back to the sheet so we?
Yes.
Already demonstrated that.
Yeah. Thanks, Juice.
Okay. And I'm gonna share the link to that integration that is available.
Can you screen share, Weslav? Because I'm currently screen sharing.
Okay, absolutely. Taking over.
Yes.
Okay, so moving on to another question because we are a little bit out of time. So another one from John is exporting content from Google Sheets can at times cause issues, especially in the case of formatted dates or sentences that seem like formulas. For example, plus $200 added to your account, and so on. How well does Gridly handle the import and export for this kind of text?
Well, I suppose I think you'd have to kind of try it out. I think, depending on the data type, the column type, then whatever you've got within that Google Sheet will then be transported into Gridly. So it will just be a like for like. If you've got a specific data type within Gridly, and then what you're trying to push from Google Sheet doesn't marry, then of course that will cause problems. But certainly, I think that I'll try. I'm going to try it myself after this. But certainly, pushing something like plus $200 added to your account, then I can't see that being an issue at all. To be fair.
Thanks. And another question from Joost, actually a more interesting question. What are the options for discussing specific individual pieces of content beyond a single node cell? Can I do something like a Google Docs sheet comments discussion on Gridly, or does that need to happen on the Google Sheet?
If I understand correctly, yeah. I mean, the thing is, within Gridly, you can have these discussions, but you're talking about specific individual pieces of content beyond a single note cell. So I think I'd need to know a little bit more about that. So can I do something like Google Doc sheet comments discussion on Gridly? I mean, that's the thing. Yes. So certainly that whole discussion can be had in the same way as you would have on a Google Sheet. And of course, you can then obviously it's associated to that particular cell. So if you click on it, it will then take you to that cell, so you can understand the context that's involved in that. Yeah, I think I probably need to know a bit more about that just before I can kind of answer that properly. But certainly having that conversation, discussion, comments is certainly doable. Absolutely.
Okay.
So the next one is from John. Yes, sorry, time is against us. So will you? Data from Google Sheets as a text. So you will get the text in Gridly, what you see in the Google Sheet. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, and I guess the last one that we can answer is also from Jaws. I had a particularly vexing issue exporting Arabic text from a Google Sheet once. Never really got to the bottom of it, like a whole thread for one string B.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's Arabic support in Gridly. So, and I'm not sure if I don't think I've actually tried to pull. Oh, just a comment. Okay, thank you. Yeah. So yeah. So well, basically, yes. It's certainly worth trying. I've not actually tried with Arabic text from Google Sheet into Gridly, but certainly we've had Arabic text in Gridly before, and I can't imagine why there would be a particular problem. But I'm going to certainly make a note of it and investigate after this. So thank you for that.
Okay, right. Wonderful. Okay. So I think
we'll look into it. We'll get back to you just.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So I think we can then close the Q&A section and wrap up. So I guess thank you all for your time and for attending this webinar. Of course, we will share the recording with you shortly via email. And of course, here are some contacts that how you can reach out to us. Do you have anything to add, Mike?
Just purely that you did add that GitHub to the chat here, so that GitHub repo location. So on there, then there's a ton of other stuff as well. There's the Unity integration, the Unreal integration, and a load of other things on there too that you could find very useful. And of course, if you want to see more, want to see it in a bit more detail, of course, try it out within Gridly itself, especially the connector, which is super simple to put together. But yeah, if you need some more assistance on the actual kind of integration, the push and pull side of things, then do get in touch. That's me. Thank you very much for your time, everyone.
Okay, thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.
Cheers. Bye-bye.